Okay, I believe we are live, and so we're gonna just hit the road here. I just drank a can of sparkling soda really fast, and that wasn't a good idea right before you have a live broadcast. Hopefully, there's not a lot of air left in there. Um, Welcome, everyone, to our Fearless Artist Community Live Studio Session. This is something we do almost every week for my Fearless Artist community. Coming into my studio, talking about this whole idea of being a heart guided artist, finding your path as a unique artist, because not one of us wants to be a copy of somebody else. Really, what's yearning in our hearts is to paint who we were meant to be, what we want to say ourselves in our work. And really, art is a form of communication. And sometimes the things we're putting on our paper are things our hearts can't say in words. And I think I just have realized that more and more over the years. You know, there was a time when I was so focused on just getting technique figured out that I really didn't have the ability to think about what my heart wanted to say. I just had to figure out how to make my brush do something. And that was okay. There was a time for that. But there was always that craving for more. And it's really exciting when you start to see hints of that on the page. And when you start to learn how to read yourself in your painting. I can now see some of the joy and love I feel for watercolor on my paintings. And I can feel more free to let it out, which, for a long time I didn't do. I was so focused on technique that I didn't really think about what emotion I wanted to share. And so we get to do that. Okay, so we are here to paint. We're here to talk about painting. I see lots of people here joining me, so that's really good. We've changed our time up from what usually works for me is to broadcast in the morning. And since my kids are home, doing school at home, and their spring break ended, and they started class this week, and so they're very frequently needing my intervention and help and guidance in the morning. So we're moving to the afternoons for these live sessions, and we'll see how that goes. I think it should work just fine. And it's really neat to see some of you who weren't able to join the morning time slot here in the afternoon or evening, wherever you are, or maybe it's early morning, like those of you in Australia. So welcome here. We are going to paint today. As you know, sometimes we're talking more mindset stuff and there's a little less painting going on, but I really wanted to do some painting. I've been wanting, and one thing I'm really trying to do in this time of kind of self-isolation, social distancing, quarantine, whatever you're going through, there's a real tendency to want to retreat into creativity. But we have to be careful, because I think sometimes that desire to retreat into creativity can put a lot of pressure on that creativity to serve you in some way. And I think when we go into creativity thinking, I have all this time to paint now, so I get to make some masterpieces, that can put a lot of pressure on the outcome. Creativity, art is here for you. But if you're not feeling that urge, to paint, that's okay. You can find solace in organizing your art supplies, in looking over past paintings, in studying someone else's work. There's a real peace in just connecting to art without putting pressure on yourself to achieve as well. And I think that when we're going through a tough time, if your emotions have taken a hit, which I know we're up and down here. Sandra commented in the chat that it feels like just one long weekend and not a good one. And I totally understand where you're at on that. Half of my Saturdays are always dedicated to laundry, and it's not a good time. So being home can have that kind of dynamic of being in limbo a little bit. And so if our emotions have taken a hit, how then can we expect that our paintings are going to suddenly become something better than what we can create when we're doing really good in our mental health? So, let your art be a retreat and an escape without putting a judgment on it to be really great. That's the upshot I wanted to share. Let it just be about the process, making that a meditative, calming, peaceful process, joyful process, beautiful process, even when the outcome doesn't turn out beautifully. So, with this, Robin's here to field your questions if you have questions and comments. So that's I always appreciate that, and she can link you up if I reference a book or a color. She'll try to reiterate those in the chat. I know sometimes I'll say a color name, and if it's foreign to you, it helps to see it in writing. So Robin takes care of that for us. Joe's commenting, that's been my experience lately. I want to create, but I put an unrealistic outcome expectation. Yeah, it is fueled by wanting to efficiently use paper. I totally hear you there. Or just to be proud of what you're making. We want to achieve something, and sometimes I don't know about you, but if you're home and you're not working, that thing that we often take pride in as part of our identity, that's not here anymore. And so, this is just a weird place, and I'm really trying to be okay with that and just be in a weird place and accept all those feelings as they come. My goal is to accept and adapt and take the small steps that I can. And so that's where we're at. And Diana says, I go to my paint to express and it's not pretty. And yeah, if we're feeling all those ugly feelings, maybe we shouldn't expect our paintings to be beautiful as well. And that's okay too. It's really good to have a release. And so art can be that. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to switch the camera over. I'm going to show you what I want to work on today. And yeah, I've got a couple different references to show you. I do not have a printable reference photo for this. Let me think here and see if I don't really have a great way to share it today, so we're just going to have to use what we have and make the best of it. This is these two paintings that you're seeing. One is my research and one is my outcome. This is a value study for this crocus painting. And this is actually a part of my watercolor mastery course. So you're getting a little peek. I know some of you here are mastery students, and you're getting a little peek of some of the content in watercolor mastery. We spent an entire week focused on value and different strategies for seeing value in our paintings. And this is the demonstration from the course. Now, the course is a principle-based course, so I don't require students to copy what I'm copying. We're moving beyond step-by-step demonstrations in the course. And so the goal here is to learn how to see value in your own reference material and to learn how to paint, use that as research and foundation for your paintings. And so I do this demonstration, but originally, this original lesson was filmed a while ago, and I get to grow as an artist every year, and I've wanted to try painting this again and simplifying it even more. And so I thought I would try to do that today. The original demonstration was done in 4 stages, and we're going to try to do it in, let's say, 1.5. So that's my goal for myself today. And over the years, I've gotten to the place where I do fewer layers, and it seems like the better I know my subject, the more I'm able to simplify it. I'm going to keep moving that so we can see most of my paper. There we go. So the more I know my subject, the better I'm able to simplify it, and often that means painting it repeatedly. So it is not uncommon for me to do 3, 4, 5, 12 versions of a painting, and I've done 20. And so I'm going to feel free to do that today. But before we go there, I want to just quickly show you. Robin, Rory's my daughter. Robin's posted a link to the crocus reference photo. Hopefully that actually works for you to download it. Let's take a look at it on the screen here. That's not it. There we go. Okay, so this is a photo that I am getting eager to see this subject again in my community. In the spring, crocuses are the first flower to bloom on the hillsides, usually on the, I want to say, for some reason I want to say north-facing hillsides, but that's not right. Usually the southwest, I guess, of hills. We'll look for crocuses in April or May. I think it's more likely to be May this year because we have a lot of snow. But they're such an amazing flower because they have this amazing deceptive delicacy about them. Very fuzzy kind of surface, which you can see a little bit of that fuzz here in the softness of the petals. delicate colors, and yet, they're hardy enough to be the first thing to bloom, which is amazing. But we have this tendency when we have a reference photo like this to paint square inch by square inch rather than simplifying and being able to paint something like this in just a layer or two. So what I like to do is create that value study. Learn how to see those values. That's not it. And one way you can do that is by creating a black and white version of your photo. And of course, that's really easy to do nowadays, especially if you've taken your picture with a digital camera. And a quick conversion to black and white like this, or grayscale is more accurate term, is going to show you where the light and darks fall. And it can often surprise you. Notice how the flower on the lower right, actually the stamen on it has almost disappeared into the white of the petal in the background, whereas the flower on the top left, you can really see that stamen really clearly. And so those are some things that we notice. We also see that some of the darkest shadow areas of the petals really blend into the background quite a bit. But we still have a tendency to want to paint all the details, maybe all those little furry blades of grass. And so often you want to paint your first layer thinking about it like this. Just take your glasses off. At least for me, I could take my glasses off, put my reference photo far enough away that it really does all look like this. And that's going to help me to see those major patterns of light and dark and see how they connect to each other. Look at how we can almost flow those lightest values as a continuous shape from left, then kind of up to the upper right corner, and then down to the lower right. We can almost see that just soft pattern of light and kind of middle values that flow together there. So I'm going to want to think about that as I create my painting. This foundational stuff can really help pull your painting together and make it a little bit easier to keep things simple. If I never want to paint detail in the background, getting these values right in that early stage is going to free me up to keep it simple. So those are reasons why I might look at my painting, kind of blurred out like this, or my reference photo, to give me that foundation where I'm not completely committed to the details. The other thing that I see when I do that is, I lost my train of thought. There is a lot of freedom there. You cannot paint loosely if you start out tight. So we want to loosen up as much as possible so that we can add detail later, but we have that freedom to just keep everything nice and loose. So that's where we're going with that. And one thing I have to comment, this is a great insight. One of my students a long time ago commented that she had a problem viewing. She had a real problem with depth perception. She actually had a vision issue that caused her depth perception to be off or lacking and caused things to look flattened. And the cool thing about that was it really made her art unique. She was showing us how she saw her world because that was how she saw it. She didn't have to invent some kind of new perspective. She just got to show us what she saw. And as artists, we all get to do that. If you have limitations, they actually become strengths in your artwork. I'm just going to moisten my palette. I did this earlier in the day, but it's already started to dry out. Let me just nurse my spray bottle to life here. There we go. There you go. You get what you pay for, and I bought that at the dollar store. Okay, so I'm going to work on dry paper today. This is my favorite method, and I'm going to try to keep my value study as my first consideration. It's going to go up here and probably get splashed with paint, but that's okay. It's a research material. The brush I'm using is my usual Escoda Versatile number 10 Rigger. I'm going to hold it right up towards the top. And I'm going to start, where am I going to start? With my lightest values. I want to paint out from my flowers, I think. So we're going to do that. And before I do that, I'm just going to breathe for a moment. You know, we tend to get in such a hurry to paint. We want to just go for it. We want to paint so that we can see if the painting turns out. But, you know, feeling relaxed, feeling less in a rush, pausing to just savor your reference photo and try to connect to it. That's really a better way to start than just plunging in and then doing your thinking. I think I'm going to try the benzimidazolone yellow, Benz yellow from Daniel Smith. And we're going to just tickle out a little rounded flower center here in a circular shape. You know, this flower is almost facing us quite as much as any of the flowers are facing us. So this is going to be quite a rounded shape. It's not going to be distorted or elongated much at all. And I probably should have left a spot for the stamen to poke out a little bit more, but I don't think it matters. And right away, I'm just going to linger here in this shape for a little while. I could let it dry and then come back and paint shadows there. That would be a more controlled way of going about it. But as an intuitive painter, sometimes I like just building out from my focal point. And I do that better when I linger in that focal point and get it looking really the way I want it to look before I move on to the next thing. And that way, everything that comes out from this flower is going to support that shape. And so it's another approach. And if you want to see that layered version, you might want to consider joining us in Watercolor Mastery next time we do it. There's never just one way to paint anything. So suddenly we now have that little, I'm actually going to use an even smaller brush here. My Loose Goose Dagger Striper from Cheap Joe's Art Stuff. We're going to go back to that yellow. And actually, so I don't have to keep spinning my palette, I'm just going to pull that yellow out. And then when I want to paint, to use it, I'll know instantly which one it was. So I'm going to just, am I close enough to we can zoom in a little bit here, I think. Let's see if I can find the button. There we go. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here. I want to create a little bit of a contour line. Find a green, maybe green gold will do it. And I think actually green gold could look really nice, just touched into our little polleny bits here too. And look at how much pretty little color is in that part of the painting. Isn't that just fun and enjoyable? I don't have perfect contours for this stamen here. Let's just maybe soften that shape just a tiny bit. But there's no rush when you're working on just a small part of the painting like this. Okay, moving back. And now we're going to start thinking about those petals. I've just used some palette dirt to add my violet right now. I think that's a bit of manganese violet from Schminke, which unfortunately I'm very, very low on. There's just a little bit left, but I think it'll be enough to get us through if we work with that color. And maybe a little bit of Daniel Smith's lavender. I've used Cobalt Violet Deep for these petals, but today I'm just going to work, let's go back to the bigger brush so we don't get fussy. Today I'm just going to work with this mix of shades because there's, again, no single way to do all of this stuff. And I'm going to start with one petal. And, you know, I'm not sure because well, no, we'll do it. the deal here is, because we're painting this in one layer, taking our time and not rushing, I'm going to carefully go around my yellow pollen here. We've got pistils and stamens, and I learned that in biology class, and I can never remember which is which. As soon as I touch the yellow, look at how it wants to push into the violet. It always feels like watercolor is dueling in a way, because certain colors will push against others. So I didn't know if the violet was going to push into the yellow or the yellow into the violet. And I got lucky, because I don't really want the purple pushing into the yellow. I want it to feel nice and sunny. If the violet had started shoving itself into the yellow, what I would have done to control that would be to add a little bit more yellow, and that increased moisture to the yellow would have probably helped it balance out that flow. The other thing I could have done was decrease the moisture in the violet so that it flowed a little less. So we're creating, this was the darkest petal according to my value study. So we're going to let some color flow to the next petal. And it's already creating a really beautiful effect here. And I might even, I'm debating whether or not, I'm not going to add my darks yet. I'm going to wait just a little while. And my petal's nice and moist here. I used a lot of clean water to kind of create the shape of that petal. And that's going to let this lovely violet flow really softly and organically. And then we have a petal on this side that appears like there's a lot of light shining on it. But it does have a hint, I think, of violet too. So we're going to just continue to kind of trace the shape of the flower with water and then touch in color. And already I can see that my shapes of my flower are not quite proportional to the photo. The good news is, you know, the wind just blew for a second and distorted the shape. That's not a big deal. A bug could have chewed it. It could have just come out of the bud wrong. Flowers do not have to be flawless. And if a petal's a little distorted, it just kind of adds to that kind of natural look. A little bit of pure manganese violet. There's kind of a, I changed to the skinny brush and I didn't change back. The nice thing about this brush is I can use the side of it to fill a large area quickly. So it works to create those fine lines as well as these larger shapes. Now, one thing I do have to comment on, you know, I'm demonstrating a more intuitive way to paint this, but my most intuitive work is always done when I don't have an audience. So you're here, you're really cramping my style, but that's okay. This is still an exploration, and I really am trying to practice what I preach, you know, model that kind of contemplative pause, just making the painting process enjoyable and beautiful. Even though the overall composition is probably going to suffer because I will be, you know, trying to work in a little more prompt way for you here. I'm going to lift out a little bit of light value here with my paper towel. Lifting that moisture will give me that feeling of sunlight. But look at how much prettiness is happening there. Really nice. I'm using my extra calm voice. I'm sure that's helping my painting as well. It's reminding me, at any rate, that what I'm saying and what I'm feeling should line up. And of course, if you speak to yourself while you're painting in a judgmental way, and then you're expecting your paintings to be loose and free and exciting, yeah, you might want to give yourself a little pep talk. So the most sunlight is falling on this area. I have lost a little bit of my light values. I don't have the same contrasts as we're seeing in my value study. Those darkest darks I can put in after that this is dry. That's the 1.5 part of this painting. I am just going to create that last petal and do a quick head count to see if I've done the right number of petals. The only one who counts your flower petals is you, probably, so you don't worry about it too much. I'm going to add a little shadow here and let that flow a little bit. That's not the best shaped crocus in the world, but I think it's a good start. Now let's pull some of this. Remember how we talked about all these shapes being connected? Let's pull some of this petal over to the next flower. I have a bigger piece of paper than I actually need for this painting, and that gives me a little bit of freedom. I can crop it smaller once it's complete. There should be yellow in this, and I haven't placed it yet, so we got to remember that. Let's just get that rounded shape in place and dot in some of those same original colors, the lavender, the manganese violet mixture. They seem to play together pretty nicely. Lavender goes with everything. It is really one of my very favorite colors to work with. Let's see what happens if we dot in that Ben's yellow at this stage when everything's quite moist. I'm going to lose you. I've zoomed in so far, you're not going to see everything. Let's go out a little bit. Okay, let's be bolder with that yellow. There we go. Let some of that color flow. And then let's pull this shape down to the next flower. And this is actually something I should have done in my original painting, because this really helps me connect each element in the painting so that I have a lovely unified composition. When you're, especially with florals, well, probably with all objects, it's really helpful to make connections to each different element so that they work together as a painting, to create flow and movement, to create a path to guide your viewer down. All of those things really give a more dynamic feel to your painting. So my darkest shadow shapes are in this area here. And I am trying to pay close attention to the shapes of the petals. There's foreshortening happening where the petals that are pointing at me are kind of looking shorter. There's just all these different little shapes going on that I want to get a feel for. And at least a hint of. They're not probably going to be 100% accurate, and that is okay. The painting doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be flawless to be full of life. In fact, flawless paintings rarely have a lot of life in them. Again, more of the Ben's yellow to create, that actually works. That one little shape there just gives us our flower center, and it looks softer and more natural than that one. If I'm comparing, which I guess I am, let's put another. This brush is really nice for creating pointy petals. As you can see, it creates that nice edge, and then I use the flat of the brush to drag out and define that shape. I'm going to tilt a little this way to get some of that yellow moving. Of course, now it's moving up into there. Softness, flow. Again, don't have to be perfect to be pretty. And then there's one big petal that kind of comes this way. I just traced it in water. I think you can see that. Let's add a hint of color to it. Do you think that shape would be enough? Let's try. Let's be brave. And there's a little flower kind of over here. Let's hint at it too. We'll pull those shapes together with looseness. You see how I'm getting a little more confident as I've painted this longer? This means I'm probably going to paint this again once you're not staring at me. But just exercising my interpretation as I've gone through these flowers has given me just a little bit more confidence through the process. For me, I'm not about painting one flawless painting. I'm always thinking, how do I equip myself with skills that are going to help me to paint any subject? How do I, and then if I choose a subject like this, I paint it until I get the one that feels right. And so this version, I reserve the right to ruin as I'm exploring my ideas, trying out different techniques. And this is really feeling more free and fluid than this guy over here. Thoughts, realizations. Okay, let's do something big and brave. And we're going to do this. Well, one reason we're going to do this is we only have so much time for this lesson. And so I want to kind of rush the ending maybe a little bit. And in my reference photo, we're seeing a beautiful kind of neutral background. I'm trying to debate as to what I could use for today's version. Often when I'm working a dark background, I'll use indigo. And I'm not sure if I want to go there today. And you might be thinking of a brown, and I'm looking at my browns and feeling a little dissatisfied with them. You know what we're going to do? We're going to take it a little bit slower. Let's back up a bit. I'm going to pull out some of this raw sienna, and it's drying a bit, so I'm going to just moisten it. I don't use the raw sienna very often, and so it's a color. Since it's a color I don't use often, it does dry out a little bit faster when I moisten it in that preparatory stage. But let's just see what happens when we use some of that for our background. And I'm starting at this area because this is one of the drier areas of the painting, but still moist enough that some of that raw sienna is probably going to flow into my petals. And then we're going to go to the indigo and see if that doesn't give us a nice mixture. It's probably not going to be perfect, but it's going to give us a dark that we can use as a neutral frame to our painting. And let's place some of that over here too. So I'm going to just kind of move back and forth, I think, between the raw sienna and the indigo. And we'll just see how working wet and wet at this point. I might lose a little bit of my petal, and I should have probably painted them just a hint larger than I needed them to be. Let's moisten that, pull some of that color down the page. But look at how pretty and soft that is. I haven't looked at the chat in a while. I'm trusting Robin to moderate, and we'll get to your questions in a few minutes. But it's probably a good thing because I'm always thinking that you're probably watching and going, no, don't do that, you're ruining it. And you know what? At the end of the day, it is my painting, so I'm experimenting. And if it doesn't work, I'll try a different way next time. But I'm actually really liking the color combination here. And notice how I didn't go straight to black. Like I didn't go to the purest, darkest saturation of the indigo for my very first move. It's really not as dark as it can be. And so that gives me room to adjust, make adjustments, build up those darks if I want to. There's a lot of fluidity here, so things are bleeding together. Where the petals are quite light, where the sun is falling on them, it's nice to have some of your darkest values there, because that really is going to give us that strong contrast and that feeling of sunlight in front of shadow. I also can here at this point, we noticed in the original how the petals on this side really blended with the background. So let's work that a little bit. Work a little magic there with some of the manganese violet. Let's go really dark with it. Flow and pull a little bit. And then we'll grab some of that indigo. And this is creating a painting where people aren't going to be able to tell what was painted first and what was painted second for a lot of this painting, because it was all painted at the same time. But you can do this after the first layer has dried, even by placing that indigo, placing some of the manganese on the flower, and then flowing those two softly together. And really kind of liking that. Look at how that petal pops forward, and then this really blurs into the background. We can't really see where that flower ends and the other one and the background begins, but it doesn't matter. It feels like flower and background, just the way it's supposed to. This flower was in quite a bit of shadow as well, so we want to, you know, drop in some darks there as well, let things flow. We're going to get some softness here. Some of that softness could depict the little fuzzy edges of the crocus, and not just a blur between light and shadow, but the actual texture of the flower. I don't want to figure out how to paint all those tiny little fuzzy hairs. That is not interesting me at all. So just hinting at it by painting a scene that has some softness and some blurring between those edges. That's a much more effective way. I'm actually holding, you can probably see my board shaking a little bit. I'm actually holding it vertically a little bit, just at a bit of an angle, and that really is helping things flow together. There's a beautiful path of light and dark here. This, I was going to add some darks there, but I kind of like that softness, so I'm gonna pause that and just kind of let that color linger there. My reference photo is telling me it should be a bit darker, but that's where I get to exercise my artistic license. The raw sienna was a good choice. One reason it was a good choice is when you're working with, why did I grab purple? When you're working with blue and violet, like the lavender is kind of a blue violet, and the manganese violet is a reddish violet, to choose a neutral that has a hint of orange, you know, that pulls out those blues, and they really pair together nicely. Look at how this petal has kind of created its own edge. That's really cool. Maybe I want to just pop a little bit of a dark in there. And it's bleeding into the petal. I think I'm okay with that. Creating that fuzziness again. So this is just a little back and forth, you know, exploring those shapes. The last thing I would do, and yeah, we're not going to quite finish this today, but I kind of like the unfinished quality of it, to tell you the truth. The openness to some of the white space around the edges, the mingling of color that's happening here. This little shape, which could be a petal, could be another flower, we don't know. The artist knows, but she's not telling. Let's just do a little bit more of that here. And I'm still on camera. I have to check my screen once in a while and make sure I haven't gotten excited and moved out of your line of sight. Let's moisten that area with that brush. You know, I've had this little Cheap Joe's dagger striper for over a decade, I think, and it's still, and I abuse it. You know, I'm scrubbing with it, rubbing it back and forth the wrong direction, and just like that. And it just holds up. It just lasts and lasts. One thing I really like about indigo, one reason I chose it today, was because of the way it watermarks. You can really get some beautiful blooms as if you drip onto it, if you place it into a wet wash, and that can. I was tempted to use hematite genuine or hematite burnt scarlet, which is a mineral color, but because the manganese creates a little bit of texture in here, I thought having the hematite in the background, which also does kind of the same thing, would probably be a little too much kind of granulation, a little too much sediment, and grittiness in this painting. So having instead chosen a color that's quite soft really gives us some nice, pretty contrast. That's the word. You can tell I'm really getting into this painting because I'm losing my train of thought repeatedly. Part of me is wondering about pushing some of those darks. Notice how these petals popped when I added those darks. And so I'm going to be continuing to kind of step back. One thing I'm doing regularly is just pulling away from the painting just a little bit so I can look at it smaller. Actually, I'm looking at it through my camera viewfinder. And that really helps me to kind of, well, see what you're seeing basically. Rather than finding my body, 6 inches away from my reference photo and having lost all perception because I'm working at this square inch and then this one and then this one and just moving methodically across the painting, which does not take into account the beauty that happens when you look at how all the elements are working together. One weak area doesn't matter so much if the painting is working as a whole, and stepping back to look really can help you keep that objectivity. You can look at it upside down, you can look at it in a mirror, just from across the room, smaller, take off your glasses and look at it blurry, just like our reference photo. That will all help you as you evaluate and try to see what the painting needs at this stage. Just letting some of that color bleed out right to the edge of the paper. I mentioned that I'm going to crop it, but I don't know where, so I want to bleed it out almost as far, almost to the very, very edge. And this area I know I'm going to be cutting off. I'm not going to really have anything down there, so that I can leave. I'm not sure. Let's try putting some darks up here. This is also a good time to adjust shapes. If you don't like the shape of some of your petals, they're going to get smaller as you adjust them, but you can adjust the size with a dark negative shape. Dot in some of that raw sienna. Look at how it pushes against the indigo, shoves it off the page. One thing I like to do, and I didn't do that here, but I really like having my elements in my painting, especially with the floral like this, touching the paper on at least 3 sides. So you can see this flower is cut off by the top of the paper. This petal is cut off. This one, I think it might be beneficial to drop and crop so that that petal is cut off as well. And then when I crop, I'll probably crop right to here and right along here. So that's 1, 2, 3 sides will be cropped. This one, I will let this flower have some breathing room so it won't be cropped right to the edge. But that is something that I've noticed that generally works really well for your composition is crop those sides so that you have 3 sides, 3 elements touching or cut off by the edge of the paper. And that really helps your painting, the composition just to feel stronger. I'm sure there's like a technical reason for that, but I'm not going to analyze it right now. Okay, looking again. This is where probably I'm at the stage where some of my flowers have dried in the center, and I could add some detail to those flower centers right now. I don't want to add too much. And actually, I don't know if it's the center that needs detail as much as the petals themselves might need a few shadows. Yeah, I'm just debating on it and making sure you can still hear me while we're at it. See, there's some great conversation about paint and pigments, and Robin's given you a great reference in Jane Blundell, because that's not something I really research so much as I want to see how my paint moves in a real life painting situation. That's what I always call it. What does it do? I don't really think a lot about pigment numbers. I don't think about all of that information on the side of the tube. I just want to know that when I choose a color, it's going to be transparent, or I want to know if it's going to be opaque, and I internalize that information best by using it. So I'm darkening some values here. This is that 1.5 part of the painting, the part where we add that little bit of detail that helps some of those shapes feel more complete. This petal's quite moist still, so we're going to get a little blotchiness, but I actually think that's going to work really well for this soft floral subject. I'm also thinking about adding a little bit of line, crisp edges that help depict the form. You know, we've worked with a lot of softness, but this crisp edge has really defined this petal. A crisp edge that's tone on tone can also do that and create that feeling of shadow. And it doesn't take much. I've got a line here, I've got this petal, I've got this one. I'm going to ignore those two, and I'm going to put a little hint of a line over here. I really don't want to fuss or get too caught up in trying to depict everything I see. So we glance at the reference photo, we go back to the painting, we create some line, and then possibly we soften, which I'm feeling like I need to do. So I'm blurring a little bit of that shape as well. This one I'm not really sure what to do with. It needs to be darkened, but I don't really want to spend a lot of... The more time you spend on an area of your painting, the more you're telling the viewer they need to spend time looking there. The more times your brush touches that part of the painting, and this is where often we're making mistakes and we're scrambling to try to fix them, and we're blotting and we're lifting and we're moving paint and layering color. And sometimes the best thing you can do for a mistake is just to leave it alone. Spend your time on a different part of the painting. The more time you spend in an area, the more important it reads to the viewer. It just does. It communicates that intensity. A little line there. I don't know if that really works. Let's add some yellow and soften that. Let them bleed together a little bit. You know, we have to decide how much detail to add, and that's very, very personal. I really want to be confident enough that people can look at my painting and interpret it without me having to spell out every detail. I love being able to hand the viewer a painting and say, you know, I trust you. I'm not going to tell you everything, and you can enjoy the love and intention I put into this painting without me needing to say, you know, these are crocuses. This is petal number 1. This is petal number 2. Let's just see if we can't use one beautiful expressive stroke to kind of trace the edge of this flower. I feel like that's the way to go. And I might need a confident shadow actually right over here. And I think I've been forgetting to breathe. I feel a little bit breathless. Sometimes that's a good sign because your painting's doing exciting things, and sometimes it's a sign of anxiety. Let's just pull that stroke across, soften with a little bit of water, let some elements flow together. I just felt like I should drip on the paper a little bit more than I have been doing. That's usually my usual method, is, you know, splashing. See, splashing. And let's throw that confident shadow in here. I don't know, that's a slightly anxious shadow actually. But it's a chance to create a negative shape around the pollen-y bits. I want to say pistils. I'm going to have to ask my kids. I'm sure one of them is taking biology right now. And one little balancing shadow there. I like this shape actually. May have been slightly anxious, but it worked. echoing that shape over here. You know, if something works in one place on the painting, try to do it with a slight variation somewhere else, and that's a good way of creating balance. Yeah, I know there's a third flower up there. You guys are real slave drivers. And let's just, again, confident, loose, expressive. Keywords can really help with the painting, keeping to your objectives. And a little bit of softness. Okay, I'm going to stop to tell you the truth. Let's just pause and reflect and take a look and evaluate and think and maybe plan a little bit for next time. Let's just look at it for a moment before I change the camera over. And I do want to hear your questions. So Robin, if you have been taking questions throughout this broadcast, feel free to pop them up in the chat right now. Track down my water. Okay, so yes, I will be sharing this as a permanent link in the Watercolor Mastery course, so we can keep all of this content together, but it is available for everyone in the Fearless Artist community. So you can learn from it as well. And, you know, oh, Pam, I love your comment. I truly dreaded painting this again. She says, I felt so defeated last year with the values. I had my darks ready and you switched it up. I did much better now. I will go at it again. It's really important to know that there's never just one way to paint something. And anytime someone asks me how to paint something, my answer is always, it depends. You know, it depends. You might find your best approach in starting with that wet and wet first layer and letting it dry and coming back to it. And sometimes there's real value in taking that kind of lingering, contemplative approach. Sometimes you just need to get in there quick and dirty and dash it out. Sometimes you want to get that focal point and build out from there. I really felt like this version benefited from me working in that circular way where all of the flowers were connected to each other. And then I wasn't obsessing about the spacing between like the two focal point flowers. They just kind of happened. They came together in the right place. So, you know, we try different things and we build this arsenal, this toolbox full of different strategies that we can try. And if one doesn't work, you know, we pick and choose from that toolbox so we can choose other ways to go about it. Just taking a look at your comments again. They're all really nice. Thank you. This went pretty well considering I felt like that first crocus really felt stiff and a little too methodical. And so I really found my groove as I went along. So probably a good note to self for next time would be do just one crocus on separate paper as a warm-up so that when I go into the whole composition, I've already worked out kind of my anxiety and issues on that little warm-up. So that is something you can totally do. Robin's just asking if she missed any questions. I'm not seeing any pop up, so that I guess that means I was really good at explaining it. And our moderator, Robin, was very resourceful. I know Joe was here today too, and Joe's always a wealth of information about supplies and material. I didn't mention the paper I used today. I've been using Arches pretty consistently. They're a 140-pound cold press. Really working consistently on great quality paper is a really good way to develop consistent working methods and know that the strategies you're using are going to work consistently from one painting session to the next. When you work on cheap paper, you develop strategies for kind of compensating for the limitations of that paper. And then when you move to a better quality paper, there's a whole new learning curve that happens. So I really like working on really great quality paper every time I paint. And that's why I keep my failed paintings so I can flip them over and use the backside. And sometimes I'll even take a failed painting that's quite light in value and I'll punch up those darks and I'll work out my frustrations by just adding more paint to a failed painting. So that's something else to consider. The Arches, or the Indigo and Raw Sienna, was a great combination to use for this neutral. I was really happy that I tried it and worked instead of using a really granular pigment that was going to leave a lot of that sedimentary marks. And Yeah, Shelley comments that it's taken even you time to process how to redo this and when it was time to try. I had a lot of time passed between that first version and the next one. And if a painting works one time and you want to revisit it years later, it's great. Composition, I would encourage you actually spend some time looking at some of the artists you follow and notice how often they repeat a composition or a subject or shapes and colors. There are certain artists that are extremely limited. Limited's not the right word. They're extremely focused in painting a particular subject, and there's so many variations on that one subject, and that should give us freedom to be willing to tackle subjects that have worked for us in the past, knowing that we can do them even better as we grow in skill and on our ability to interpret in our own way. We're pretty much out of time, and Sunshine Girl asks, what would you recommend we do with the cheap paper we already own? I wouldn't throw it away. You certainly, it's not a bad. It's all painting, all brush miles are brush miles. They all count towards building your skill. So I wouldn't say just abandon it and go out and buy all new paper, but just know that if you're feeling frustration with the paper you're using, and it's a student grade paper or it's a paper that's partly cellulose, sometimes a lot of that frustration can be just amazingly decreased by working with that 100% cotton paper. So, find ways to use it. Color swatches are really good. Practicing your mark making and learning confident brush handling can happen no matter what quality paper you're using, or on those, what are they called, Buddha boards, where you're just working with water on that slate. And anytime you're moving your brush, you're gaining an ability to work with it adeptly. So even if your paper is not great, hopefully that's helpful. We get to paint and just do the things that we feel are most beautiful in the moment, and that is really what creates our most authentic work and work that's really exciting. So I would encourage you just to show up to the studio and ask yourself, what if? Try things, be constantly experimenting. Magic will happen, the skills will grow, and you'll see yourself develop into the artist you were meant to be. And that's the one thing I really love sharing with you in our Fearless Artist community. Week after week, month after month, really that's the journey, and it never ever ends, and it's always changing and exciting, and can be so satisfying. So thank you for coming along with me on that. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment here on this video or in our Fearless Artist community at fearlessartist.net. Thanks for joining me, and enjoy your evening, your day, wherever you're at in this day. Bye for now.